So let me start by telling you a story. I must have been around 10 years old or so, and it was the first time I heard about the women on the square. The women gathered on the square weekly, and they claimed for justice. They claimed for truth. They wore a white scarf around their heads, and they carried pictures of their children who had disappeared. They were gone. As you know already now, I grew up in Argentina. I grew up during the military dictatorship from 76 to 83. And what happened during that period was that around 30,000 people who were or were perceived to be political opponents were illegally detained, killed, tortured, and had their remains disappear in the most atrocious ways. The women on the square claimed that the government let them know what happened to them, and that those who were responsible for those atrocious crimes were brought to justice. However, while I was growing up, my country was torn between that claim for justice of the population or part of the population on the one hand, and on the other hand, the perceived need for stability and democracy. As a result, the possibility for victims of those serious crimes to bring claims to the courts was barred, and they could not claim for justice during those years. Fast forward, it took 30 years for them to go back to the courts. But going back to my personal story, that was around the time, as I said, I was 10 or 12. Fast forward to the time I was around 19. I was doing my legal training, and as part of that training, I was working in a tribunal. The tribunal I worked for dealt with compensation claims for car accidents, non-execution of contracts, for when citizens claimed compensation for expropriation of property by the state. It was around the same time that I was doing courses in international law and human rights. And I was almost shocked when I realized that victims like the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, the group I was telling you about, that had family members killed, that had family members deprived of their right to life, could not go to international courts when the state had committed those crimes against citizens. Meanwhile, victims of a car accident, and as serious as that can be, they could go for acts that could be considered of a lower gravity. So that is what inspired me to start researching about the possibility for victims to be engaged in justice processes. I was lucky because I could do that research, and later in life, I had the opportunity to start working directly with victims of serious crimes and mass atrocities to help them go before tribunals and engage directly in justice activities. What I'd like to tell you today is 3 lessons that I've learned, or 3 main aspects of the work that have marked my experience working with victims so far. And I'm going to give them a power name, so each of them is going to be the power of. The first one is what I will call the power of survival. You can imagine that talking to victims that went through that type of experience, one can learn a lot about brutality, cruelty, destruction, harm, suffering. Yet, there's something that keeps people going. Something that keeps individuals and community going. And that is what I call the power of survival. The second is what I will call the power of humanity. And that encompasses human values and connection. One thing that struck me very much is that I traveled to countries that had no experience in justice systems. The tribunals didn't work, they were corrupt, they were not independent. People did not have an experience of justice in that sense. Yet, they knew what was right and what was wrong. There was something, there was a human sense of justice and dignity. I also learned that people have a great need to belong. And that's why when they are engaged directly in justice processes, they change. There's something that changes. I work here in The Hague, the place of tribunals and courts. And I fear that although it's very important for these courts to develop international law and principles, those principles have no meaning if they're not connected to change in human lives. And the last one, the power of empowerment. Victimization has the effect of silence, the effect of invisibility, the effect of denial, the effect of isolation. When you work with people who have suffered and you start telling them about their rights, they realize that that human sense that they have, that the killing of their family members, the rape and torture that they suffered, the destruction of properties and villages was not right. They knew that was not right, but when you talk to them about that, they regain some feeling of humanity. And they start to talk. And they start to look around and they realize that they're not alone. And they start to get organized. And they start to claim for their rights before they're on stage. That is what I call the power of change, the power of empowerment and the power of change. And that is why I think that working with victims of these crimes and engaging them in justice has the effect of getting them become actors of change. Thank you very much.